all right, we're not gonna hurt you. Just try to reach my hand.
What if the daughter you lost years ago somehow returned? Not as a child, but as a creature from the forest. In the autumn of 1989, deep in the Ozark woods near Jasper, Arkansas, a grieving woman named Dana heard something impossible. The muffled cry of a child echoing through the trees. What she found was not human, but its eyes, its gestures, even the way it shielded its face, mirrored her late daughter, Molly. Against all logic, against fear, Dana took it in. For 3 years, she raised the creature in secret, fed it, taught it, loved it, and in return, she found healing. And a truth that would shatter everything she thought she knew about loss, about motherhood, and about what lives in the forgotten corners of our world. Because maybe, just maybe, love doesn't always come in the shape we expect, and letting go is sometimes the deepest form of holding on. This is a true story, told for the first time from those who lived through it. Now, before we begin, may I ask, where are you watching from today? What's your name, dear friend? Because stories like this deserve to travel far, to every heart that's ever felt alone in the dark. If this touches something in you, I'd be honored if you hit the like button and subscribe. Let's build a community that believes the forest is alive, and Bigfoot might just be family. The wind moved like a memory through the early autumn woods of the Ozarks, quiet, cool, and full of things unsaid. Dana Whitlock's boots pressed gently into the thick blanket of fallen leaves, each step sounding like a page turning in some forgotten story. The trees wore their copper and rust crowns proudly, trembling with the whisper of approaching winter. She carried a woven basket on one arm and a slender walking stick in the other, eyes sweeping low for chanterelles or puffballs, anything to break the hush of a cabin too silent for too long. The forest had been her balm, her punishment, her church. Ever since the accident took Molly, Dana had kept her distance from people, burying herself deeper into the woods year after year. The cabin by the ridge was small, plain, and private, just like she liked it. No television, no phone line, just a wood stove, a kettle, and a photo frame she couldn't turn face up without shattering. She'd nearly passed the old oak, the one with a root that curled like a reaching hand, when she stopped. A sound, not a bird, not the usual creak of bark or rustle of leaves. This was something else. A sob, low, muffled, as though someone were trying not to be heard. A child. Not the sharp cry of hurt, but the buried whimper of someone who'd already been crying for hours and no longer had the strength. Dana stood still, every nerve stiff as pine resin. She hadn't heard a child's cry in nearly 6 years. The sound came again from the base of the oak. Slowly, carefully, she stepped around it, eyes scanning the underbrush. The wind dipped. Then she saw it, curled beneath the tree, half covered in wet leaves and moss, was a small creature. At first, Dana's breath hitched. Was it a bear cub? A coyote pup? But then it moved. Its fur was soaked, deep brown with streaks of darker mud clinging to its limbs. It was small, but not helpless, shivering, arms wrapped around its knees, and its eyes like no animal she'd ever seen. Dark as coffee, rimmed with an amber glow that caught the light when it dared glance at her. Those eyes were watching her. Not wild, not empty, but scared. And something more than scared. They looked like they were asking. Its right foot was twisted awkwardly beneath a gnarled root. When Dana stepped forward, the creature whimpered and flinched. She stopped cold. "I'm not gonna hurt you," she whispered, voice barely carried by the wind. The creature didn't understand the words, but it didn't run either. Then it lifted its small hands, covered in fur, but shaped like a child's. And what it did next cracked something in her she didn't know was still capable of breaking. It covered its face with both hands, palms in, elbows curled. Exactly the way Molly used to do when the thunder rolled in and she'd pretend not to be scared, even though her whole body trembled. Dana's knees buckled, and she sank to the damp earth. The sob rose up inside her, sharp and sudden. But she swallowed it. Swallowed it like she'd swallowed every cry since the crash. She looked down at the little thing. No, not a thing, a someone. And her heart did something it hadn't done in years. It reached. Behind her, the wind stirred again, pulling at her hair like a voice she almost remembered. She stood and glanced around. And that's when she noticed the tracks. Huge, far too large to be from any human. They led away from the oak, deep into the trees. One after another, pressed firm into the mud, heading down slope. Dana felt the back of her neck prickle. They hadn't led to the creature, they led away. Had it been left behind, abandoned, or was it running from something? A part of her, a deep, trembling voice shaped like her father, told her to back away, to leave it there. This wasn't her business. This wasn't her child. But another part, the part that still wore Molly's memory like a second skin, stepped forward. She bent low, wrapping the creature, this tiny, trembling bundle of fur and breath, in her flannel overshirt. The thing flinched again but didn't resist. She whispered, "I got you," not knowing who she was saying it to. The walk back was slow. Dana's boots slid on damp earth, the weight in her arms growing heavier with every step. Not because the creature was large, but because of what it meant. It meant memory. It meant a heart cracking open. It meant risk. About half a mile from the cabin, headlights rounded the bend. Dana froze. A rusty old Ford truck came into view. Hank's, her neighbor from down the hill, known for his hunting stories and strong coffee. The creature in her arms went perfectly still. No trembling, no breathing. As though someone had flipped a switch, Dana took a step off the trail, pressing herself against the tree line. Hank rolled by slow, window down, country music bleeding into the trees. He didn't see her, didn't stop. And the moment he passed, the creature exhaled. A soft, silent breath. She looked down, startled. It had been taught to hide from humans. Back at the cabin, Dana placed it, him, on the old patchwork quilt folded in Molly's cedar chest. She lit the stove, warmed broth, and watched him from the corner of her eye. He curled into the blanket like it knew him. She whispered the name aloud, not even realizing she was naming him. Rook. That night, rain tapped on the roof like a soft knock from the past. Dana sat in the worn chair, eyes heavy. The fire cracked low. Rook lay curled near the hearth, tiny breaths warming the air. And then the wind shifted. A sound rolled in through the trees, deep, drawn out, like someone calling for something they'd lost. Low and long. It shook the windows slightly. Dana's heart paused. She looked toward the glass. Rook stirred, sat upright. His small frame stiffened, and then, from deep inside his throat, a soft reply emerged. Not a growl, not a cry, a resonance. A note matching the call, but smaller, younger. A name. He knew it. And for the first time, Dana understood. He wasn't lost. He was being looked for. But she didn't know, yet, if that meant rescue or return. By the second week, the cold had settled into the bones of the Ozark woods like a long sigh. The leaves were nearly all down, scattered in wind-blown clumps across the clearing. A frost came each night now, dusting the cabin roof in silver. Dana wrapped the old plaid blanket tighter around her shoulders and leaned on the porch railing, steaming mug in hand, watching the smoke from the chimney twist upward into the pale sky. Inside, he was asleep, again curled into that same tight little ball, like a kitten who hadn't yet decided the world was safe. The quilt beneath him smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. It had once been Molly's favorite, pieced together from flannel shirts and old cotton dresses, stitched by Dana's mother back when the world still felt reversible. Now, it belonged to someone else. Rook. She wasn't sure why the name had stuck. It came out of her like breath, like something she'd already known. He didn't respond to it at first, just blinked at her with those amber-shadowed eyes. But after a few days, when she whispered it in the quiet between stove clicks and creek water boiling, he began to turn. He didn't speak, at least not the way humans did. But he listened. God, did he listen. He didn't like milk. That much was clear from the gagging noise and the way he shoved the cup away with the back of his knuckles. But apples, especially mashed with cinnamon, he loved those, and roasted pumpkin with a touch of salt. Boiled roots, if they were soft enough. He devoured quietly, always cross-legged, always with one hand near his mouth and the other pressed flat to the floor like it helped him stay grounded. There was a rhythm forming now, though Dana wouldn't admit it out loud. Mornings were quiet. He slept late, always bundled in the blanket, face buried, one hand under his cheek. Exactly how Molly used to sleep on the couch when she was 6. One arm flung across the pillow like it was holding back dreams. The first time Dana noticed that, she had to sit down. Her knees buckled in a way that felt old. She stared for a long while, and the coffee in her hand went cold. He mimicked things, subtle things. When she read aloud in the evenings, mostly old gardening books or short stories she knew by heart, he'd curl at her feet, head tilted like a pup learning a language. And if her voice faltered, if the sadness slipped in like it did some nights, he'd look up. He'd stretch his hand toward her shoulder, palm open, awkward and unsure. The first time he did it, Dana flinched. Not because she was scared, but because her body hadn't felt kindness in so long it didn't know how to receive it. Rook pulled back, made a low sound that wasn't quite a whimper. "No," she said softly, swallowing hard. It's okay, baby." He watched her then, like really watched her, as if her pain was a thing he could touch. And when she forced a tired smile, he lifted the corners of his own mouth, lopsided and small. The motion was wrong. The timing was off. But it meant something. It meant he was trying. By the second week, she knew they needed rules. It wasn't fear, not exactly. But people passed by sometimes. Hank came up to fix the broken porch step, like he promised months ago, hammer in hand, his voice warm and steady. Dana felt Rook stiffen the moment the tires crunched down the path. He'd hidden fast, slipped beneath the table and tucked himself into the shadows. The only trace of him, muddy footprints half the size of hers, drying on the kitchen floor. That night, she drew a line across the living room floor using an old burnt match and a piece of charcoal. It was thin, no more than a whisper on the wood, but Rook watched every stroke. "This," she said, pointing. "When people come, you don't cross it." He didn't nod, didn't move, just looked at her, then placed one hand flat against his own chest. Slowly, deliberately, he pressed that hand to the line on the floor. A promise. She couldn't sleep that night. Something about the way he honored that line, the way he looked at her while doing it, made her wonder what kind of home he had come from, and what kind of rules had been taught to him before he ever stepped foot into hers. The next morning, something new was waiting. She opened the cabin door and nearly dropped her mug. Right there on the porch, placed neatly beside the firewood, was a bundle of wild grasses, but not just tossed together. Woven, braided with care, with intention. The strands looped into a tight, symmetrical knot. There was no sign of who had left it, no footprints, no sound in the trees. She stepped outside, the boards creaking beneath her, and picked up the bundle with both hands. Inside, Rook sat up the moment he saw it. He scrambled forward on all fours, then slowed, as if remembering to be careful. He touched the bundle with trembling fingers, sniffed it, then made a low, mournful sound from deep in his chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't joy. It was something closer to grief. Dana knelt beside him. "What is it, Rook?" He looked up at her. For the first time, his eyes looked older than his face. He brought the bundle to his chest and held it there. That night, the wind was louder. The trees thrashed against each other like something was warning the dark to stay back. Dinah double-checked the locks, even though she knew they wouldn't matter if whatever lived out there really wanted in. Still, the cabin held, and Rook stayed by the hearth, curled once again in Molly's quilt. Days passed, then a week, then 2. Hank came by again, toolbox in hand, smiling that way men in their 60s did when they had no one left to smile at but their own memories. He tapped the porch post with a knuckle, nodded at the repaired stair. Said he'd heard something strange last night. Like, I don't know, he muttered. Not a coyote, not a bobcat, deeper, sadder. Dana played dumb. She always had a knack for it when necessary. He smiled anyway. I swear, Dana, these woods, sometimes I feel like we're the visitors. She watched him drive off and close the door gently behind her. Rook was crouched under the table again, peeking through the woven chair legs. He hadn't crossed the line. The next morning, another bundle. This one was different, smaller, tighter, twisted into a ring, not a knot. Dana picked it up with a strange weight in her chest. She didn't know what the symbols meant, but Rook did. The moment he saw it, he made a soft, chittering sound, like a cry and a warning rolled into one. He clutched the ring and let out a breath like a song gone wrong. Later that night, she caught him sitting by the window, staring into the trees. The glass trembled slightly, not from the wind. There it was again, the sound. That same deep call from far off in the woods. Low, rhythmic, too precise to be an animal, too primal to be a human. Rook answered, not with words, with resonance. A hum, faint and quivering, not defiant, not eager, just young. Dinah sat in the dark for a long while after that, watching the boy who wasn't a boy answer a voice that called for something she could never understand. She pulled the blanket tighter around her. She was learning something dangerous. She was loving him, and she knew, somewhere in the chambers of her scarred heart, that loving him wouldn't be enough to keep him. By the time the last of the red leaves turned to brown, Rook had grown almost as tall as Dinah's shoulder. It hadn't happened overnight, but there was a moment, one morning in late October, when she glanced over and caught him ducking slightly beneath the doorway that used to frame him like a child. She stared, blinking hard, realizing the quilt didn't fully cover him anymore. The sleeves of Molly's old flannel shirt, once too large, now clung snug to his arms. He wasn't a baby anymore, and something in that quiet fact sat heavy in her chest. The cabin had adjusted in small ways. Rook could open the pantry latch himself now, though he always paused before doing it, looking back at her like a child testing permission. Dana had reinforced the back door after noticing him idly fiddling with the lock, not out of distrust, but instinct. The boy wasn't trying to leave, but there was a knowing in his hands, a memory his body hadn't forgotten. He'd lived in places without locks. He knew how to move through the world in silence. Then came the morning he was gone. Dana woke to silence that wasn't right, the kind that creeps in when something's been subtracted from the air. The quilt lay folded, not in a mess, but tucked in the shape of careful goodbye. The bowl of root mash on the counter hadn't been touched, and the floor near the door bore a single scuff. His foot dragged through ash near the fireplace. Her heart dropped. It wasn't panic yet, but something close. She stepped outside, breath steaming, fingers trembling as they clutched the porch railing. The woods were still, like they were watching. She called his name once, then again, no answer. She followed the prints, bare feet, larger than before, moving with purpose. Not like he'd wandered. He'd chosen to go. The trail curved toward the stream, crossed it, then turned sharply uphill. Then, halfway up the ridge, the track stopped. Not disappeared, just ended. No drag marks, no signs of a struggle. just gone. But to the left, near the old cedar where the moss grew thickest, there was something else. A second set of prints. Larger, deeper, not boot prints, not human. Dana crouched, fingers brushing the edge of a sunken heel. The spacing was wide. The shape, off. Toes longer, weight distributed differently. Her breath caught. She wasn't the first to find him, but she was the one he'd come back to. Because just as fear began to rise, just as she turned to head back, she heard it. Soft footfalls. And there he was. He stood at the tree line, a shape against the dim light, taller than she remembered, his arms holding something wrapped in hide. He walked toward her without sound. When he reached her, he stopped, holding out the object. It was a strip of thick boar hide, cured and etched with markings, lines and slashes shaped like paths, symbols that meant something in a language older than English. It smelled of deep forest, of damp stone, of a place that lived further in than she'd ever dared to walk. Dana took it, hands shaking. Rook didn't explain. He just looked at her, eyes soft, tired, and a little older than they had any right to be. That night, as they sat by the fire, she laid the hide across the table. Rook touched the edge with reverence, fingers tracing one of the symbols. A swirl inside a square, then a jagged line, then a crescent. He didn't speak, but his silence was loud. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She just pulled the quilt over his shoulders again, even though it barely fit, and let the firelight carry them into sleep. 2 nights later, she saw them. She'd stepped outside for kindling, the basket tucked under one arm, when her breath stopped mid-draw. Across the clearing, just past the edge where the moonlight thinned, stood 2 towering figures. Still, watching. Not hostile, not hiding, just there. She didn't move. Neither did they. Then the taller one, fur lighter, streaked with ash and silver, did something unexpected. It bowed its head, just slightly. A motion almost imperceptible but unmistakably human in its grace. Then they turned, disappearing into the woods as quietly as they'd come. Inside, Rook had stood. Not out of fear, but recognition. He walked to the window and stared into the dark long after the shapes were gone. She didn't ask if he wanted to follow. He didn't say if he wanted to stay. The next day, Jesse came by. He brought chopped firewood, a crate of apples, and that same boyish grin that hadn't left since summer. At 17, Jesse was still growing into his voice, but there was a steadiness in him Dana had come to trust. They sat on the porch, sipping cider as wind shook the maple branches. "You ever notice these?" Jesse asked, pointing at the wooden beam beside the door. Dana followed his gaze. There, barely noticeable, was a tight knot of dried grass, braided, hung low. "My dad says those are like signs," Jesse said. "From the old folks, the ones before us. Not settlers. Older. People who didn't need maps." Dana raised an eyebrow. "Your dad believe in that sort of thing?" "He believes in whatever scares him less than the truth," Jesse muttered, smirking. She laughed, but it came out short. Later that night, something moved outside. Dinah had dropped the hatchet earlier while splitting logs, too tired to fetch it. Now it stood upright by the chopping stump, perfectly balanced, gleaming with dew. No footprints, no sound, just a small act of intention. Something, or someone, had come close enough to pick it up. But not too close. Rook sat near the door, staring at it like he understood more than she ever would. The forest had edges she hadn't known existed. Lines that were being drawn. Paths opening or closing based on choices neither of them fully controlled. And each night the call returned, the deep, resonant hum from the trees. Not threatening, not beckoning, just persistent. And Rook always answered. Not loudly, not eagerly, just enough to be known. Dana started dreaming in fragments. Moss-covered stairways. Eyes in the dark, kind but ancient. The sensation of being watched, but not judged. One night she woke to find Rook sitting outside the door, legs crossed, back straight, eyes closed, like he was listening with something deeper than ears. She watched him from the doorway. The boy she'd taken in wasn't hers to keep. He never had been. But she had loved him as if he were. The next morning, she found the cedar branch twisted into a new shape, hung on the corner of the porch like a flag without a country. She didn't know what it meant. But Rook did. He stood beside it for a long time, one hand resting gently against the wood, the other clenched at his side. Then he turned, looking back toward the trees, not with longing, with readiness. The kind of readiness that only comes when you know you have a choice to make, and no matter which path you take, a part of you won't return. Dinah sat by the hearth that night, watching the fire flicker low, her hands wrapped around a mug she didn't sip from. Rook stood by the window, eyes locked on the tree line. Neither spoke, but the silence wasn't empty. It was a bridge between what was and what was waiting, between who we raise and who they become when they leave. And outside, the call came again, louder now. Closer. The forest wasn't asking anymore. It was reminding. The boy at the window heard it. And somewhere deep inside, so did she. By the time December sank its teeth into the Ozarks, the forest had thinned into bony silhouettes, and a silence that clung to the hills like breath in cold air. The trees stood stripped and skeletal, their secrets easier to hear now, their shadows longer, less forgiving. Dana's cabin, half swallowed by frost and solitude, remained the only warm dot of light for miles. But the silence didn't last. It started as murmurs in town. At the gas station, the feed store, the back pews of the little Methodist chapel off County Road 7. Folks muttering over paper coffee cups, their voices kept low out of habit, not disbelief. You heard that last night? Not a coyote, not an owl either. Sounded bigger. People in small towns don't shout when they're scared. They get quiet, sharper. And when Roy Marrow spoke up, folks listened, not because he was right, but because he was loud enough to sound like he might be. Roy wasn't a bad man, just the kind of man who needed something to aim at. He'd spent most of his life hunting things, deer, bears, even a bobcat once that had gotten into someone's chickens. So when the nightly howls crept past his porch light and sat on his lungs like smoke, he didn't wonder. He loaded his rifle and declared, "I'll find it, whatever it is, and I'll put it down." At home, Jesse heard it first, his father's voice cracking the air like a warning flare. "You don't even know what it is," Jesse said, arms crossed at the dinner table. Roy didn't look up from cleaning the barrel. "Don't have to. You hear something screaming out there in the dark. You don't wait around to shake its hand." "It's not hunting us," Jesse muttered. Roy's eyes lifted slow, cold. "You gone soft, boy? You forget how fast a thing can turn?" Jesse didn't answer. But he thought of the woven grass bundles, of the way Dana's porch always smelled like cedar smoke and something older. He thought of the eyes he'd seen once, just once, behind her curtain. Large, amber glass, watching him with a silence he couldn't name. Back at the cabin, Dana had started noticing changes. Rook flinched now when she opened the door too quickly. He pressed close to the walls when the wind shifted, nostrils flaring, as if he were sniffing for more than just weather. One afternoon, Roy's truck rolled up the ridge, slow, too slow for just a visit. Dana watched from the window, hands wrapped in a towel, heart tightening. Roy knocked once, firm, the kind of knock that pretended to be polite. "Afternoon," he said when she cracked the door. His breath clouded in the cold. "You heard it, haven't you?" Dana blinked. "Heard what?" "That thing, at night. Some kind of roar, like it's calling to something." She shrugged. "It's the Ozarks, Roy. The trees talk louder this time of year." He tilted his head. Eyes narrowed. "You've got prints out there. Big ones, bigger than my boots. You see anything strange, you come to me first. You understand?" Dana nodded slowly. Of course. But behind the curtain, Rook had pressed himself into the farthest corner under the kitchen counter, his chest barely moving. Dana crouched after Roy left, lifted the curtain edge. His eyes were wide, pupils huge, every muscle drawn tight. She whispered, "He's gone." Rook didn't move. Later that night, Dana found the bundle of braided grass on her porch torn to pieces. not scattered, but deliberately pulled apart and dropped in a perfect circle. And at the center, a ring of broken, limp blades twisted and snapped. She didn't need to ask what it meant. Rook walked out onto the porch slowly. He saw the broken ring and stopped cold. Then, for the first time in weeks, he let out a sound Dana had never heard, a low, vibrating whimper drawn deep from the ribs. Not loud, not panicked, grieving. She reached out, but he backed away, eyes locked on the circle. Then he tilted his head back and made a sound that didn't belong to any language she knew. It was long, pure, resonant. A kind of mourning note, echoed from somewhere ancestral. The sound seemed to tremble the snow on the rooftop. Dinah didn't move. She listened, hands clenched against the cold railing, feeling every note thread through her. The next morning, Hank stopped by with a fresh stack of chopped wood. He looked around the cabin like he was seeing it for the first time. His boots paused near the ring of broken grass, but he didn't ask. Inside, over coffee, he leaned in close. "I don't know what's going on out here, Dana," he said gently. "But I know your heart, and I know you'd never bring trouble if you could help it." She looked away, blinking hard. "I'm just saying," he added. "You need anything, you let me know." That night the sound returned. But it wasn't just one call. It was two. One far off, the usual, deep and rumbling, like a tree groaning under weight. The second, sharper, closer, from the hill behind the cabin. Dana sat up in bed, ears straining. Then, down the hallway, she heard it. Rook was crying. Not loudly, not with tears, but the kind of sound only a mother would recognize. Not pain, not fear. A fracture. She stepped into the room, and he was curled beneath the window, arms wrapped around his knees, eyes wide open. His lips moved slightly, repeating the same soft noise over and over. A name, maybe. Or a prayer. She sat beside him, not touching, just breathing in rhythm with his breath. And when he finally looked at her, his face held something she hadn't seen since the day she found him beneath the oak tree. Resignation. Dana couldn't sleep. She sat near the stove until the embers turned soft orange. Her fingers traced the worn wood of the rocking chair, heart moving in strange circles. She knew what was happening. The forest was calling louder now. The line between Rook's world and hers was thinning, and the town was waking up. She remembered how Molly used to ask if trees had ears. And now, Dana thought, maybe they always had. She stepped outside before dawn. The frost was sharp, biting her skin. But she needed to see. The trees loomed ahead, quiet, waiting. Rook stood at the edge of the clearing, barefoot, arms at his sides, eyes fixed on the tree line like he could see past it, like he already knew who was on the other side. She didn't speak. The snow crunched under her boots as she approached. He turned slightly, not away, not toward, just enough for her to know. He had heard her coming, but he needed to stand alone a little longer. The wind passed between them, quiet and full of things unspoken, and in the distance, barely audible over the hush of the pines, the forest exhaled. Donna looked at the boy beside her, not a boy anymore, and wondered how long he'd be able to keep choosing to stay. The wind that night felt heavier than usual, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. It pressed against the cabin walls like something trying to speak through the wood. Inside, Dana sat hunched over the dining table, the fire behind her low, throwing soft gold against the kitchen walls. Her hands were wrapped around a chipped mug of tea she hadn't sipped. The radio was off. Even the clock seemed quieter. And Rook. Rook hadn't moved from the window in almost an hour. He stood there like a sentry, eyes fixed on the tree line as if waiting for something to break through it. His silhouette had stretched these past few months. Taller, shoulders broader, a presence that filled the room even in stillness. But tonight, his frame was tight, coiled. Dana could feel it like a thread pulled too far. Then it came, a sound like a thunderclap wrapped in metal, far off, but unmistakable. A gunshot, Then the wings. Birds burst from the trees, hundreds of them, rising like ash from a bonfire. Dana stood before her mind had time to catch up. She grabbed her coat, boots half-laced, heart in free fall. Rook turned to her, his eyes wide but focused. Not afraid, alert. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. By the time they reached the edge of the trail, Jesse was already running toward her from the road, flashlight bobbing in his hand, voice short and sharp. "They fired into the woods," he said, panting. "Said they saw something big, bigger than a bear." Dana looked toward the hills, then back at Jesse. "They with your dad?" He nodded. "He took a crew up Ridgeback Pass. Said he won't come back till he finds whatever's been howling." Dana didn't wait. She moved. Jesse followed without asking. The path narrowed fast, mud slick with melting snow, twigs snapping underfoot. Branches clawed at her jacket. The air stung her lungs. But she didn't stop. Halfway up the ridge, a faint light flickered through the trees. They slowed. Voices echoed ahead, angry, unsure. Roy's voice stood out. "I know I hit it. Thing was the size of a damn cow. There's no way it just vanished." Dana crouched low behind a fallen trunk, pulled Jesse down beside her. They watched Roy and two others pacing in the snow, rifles slung loose in their hands. No blood, no trail, just the weight of something unfinished. "You see a body?" one man asked. Roy didn't answer. He kicked at the dirt, spat. "It'll be back." But it already was. Dana felt it before she saw it. The air shifted. The temperature dropped just enough to raise the hairs on her neck. And then, movement. From the shadows, a shape emerged. Cairn. He stepped out from the trees like he'd always been there. One massive hand pressed to his shoulder, fur-matted, breath fogging thick in the cold. He didn't growl, didn't charge. He just stood there, watching the men who had tried to kill him. His eyes locked onto Roy's for a heartbeat too long. Dana wanted to scream, to run, to beg Cairn to disappear. But something stopped her. Cairn lifted his hand from his wound, blood but not much, and placed it gently on the side of a nearby tree. A single, heavy touch, and then he was gone. No sound, no rustle, just gone. Jesse turned to Dana, his voice shaking. "Did you see that?" She nodded. Her throat ached from holding the cry in. When they returned to the cabin, the clearing was glowing under moonlight. The snow had stopped. The air felt tense, like a room waiting for someone to speak first. Then the headlights appeared. Roy's truck. He wasn't alone. Dana stepped onto the porch just as Roy stopped at the edge of the yard. His face was pale, eyes scanning every corner like something might jump from the shadows. Behind him, Rook stepped into view. No longer hiding, he stood tall at the porch, bare feet planted, body still. His eyes met Roy's and didn't blink. And then slowly he stepped forward. Dana's breath caught. He positioned himself directly between her and the truck. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, a wall of bone and breath. Roy's mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He backed up half a step, and that's when she saw her. Willow, she appeared like mist. Out of nothing, behind Rook, taller than Dana remembered. Her fur shimmering under moonlight, her face unreadable but strong. She reached out gently and placed her hand on Rook's shoulder. He didn't flinch. She tugged. He didn't move. Dana felt her knees tremble. Then Rook looked back, not at Willow, at her, and that look said everything. He wasn't choosing between them. He was caught between both. Willow stepped forward. She raised her hand, palm to her own chest, then touched Rook's, then pointed toward Dana's heart. Dana's vision blurred. A gesture, not possession. Shared love. Rook belonged to both worlds, and both women knew it. A long silence held the air. Then, without words, Willow gestured again. A slow, deliberate motion. The time was coming. Not now, but soon. They would return. Dana felt the weight of it. Not as threat, as promise. She stepped down from the porch, barefoot in the snow, and stood inches from Rook. She reached up and touched his face, warm under her palm, then turned to Willow and nodded. Not yes, not no. Just, I understand. Then Roy's engine revved. He backed the truck down the hill, headlights swallowed by trees, silence returning in his place. Dana looked back once more. The clearing was empty, but the imprint remained. The ground held the memory of feet that weren't human, and her heart held the echo of a goodbye not yet spoken. Above her, the stars blinked through frost-covered branches. Not all goodbyes come with tears. Some arrive as silence, some as breath, and some, like tonight, as the space left behind when a child steps into the dark and doesn't look back. Rain had been falling since before dawn, a soft, steady drizzle, more like a whisper than weather, the kind that soaked through layers without anyone noticing, that made the trees lean in, hush their limbs, and listen. The forest looked blurred through the windows, like a half-finished painting of winter giving way to something new. But inside Dana's cabin, time had slowed. Again, she stood at the stove, watching water boil for tea she wouldn't drink. Her eyes kept drifting to the window, where Rook sat cross-legged on the floor, staring into the gray beyond, like he could hear something she couldn't. His shoulders rose and fell with patience. Not restlessness, not tension, just presence. The past few days had felt like the hush before something important. Dana had learned to feel it in her bones. The way the cabin creaked differently when change was coming. The way the birds grew quiet. How the air pulled itself thin and still. She had felt it once before, a long time ago. The day of the accident. The last morning she ever saw Molly alive. She hadn't spoken about that day in years. Not to anyone, not even to herself. But something in Rook's silence cracked her open in places she'd patched long ago. And when the fire burned low enough, and the world outside pressed its hand to the window panes, she found herself sitting on the floor beside him, staring into the same mist. "You know," she said quietly, her voice almost unrecognizable, "I've been pulled from wreckage before." Rook didn't turn his head, but his ear twitched slightly. "I was driving down 84. Black ice on the curve just past the creek bridge. The car went sideways, flipped into the ditch. Her fingers moved over her wrist, a habit. I came to with the passenger door crushed, glass everywhere. Molly was already gone." She didn't cry. Not anymore, but her throat tightened. "I don't remember crawling out. I don't remember unbuckling. All I remember is the door creaked open, and a hand, covered in mud and moss and fur, wrapped around mine, pulled me out, laid me in the snow." She looked at Rook now. "I thought it was a dream. I told the EMTs I got out myself, but I didn't." She paused. "I remember the hand. I remember how warm it was. I remember how it held me like I mattered." The rain deepened outside, and Rook slowly turned his head toward her. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. She saw it then, not just recognition, not just memory. Connection. She reached behind her and grabbed the old bark scrap from the table. The one Rook had worn like a necklace, etched with markings. She laid it flat between them. "You wore this the first day I found you. You remember?" Rook nodded once. "I never knew what it meant, but now I think maybe it was meant for me." She turned the piece over, ran her thumb along a curved symbol burned into the surface. It wasn't random. It was a shape, a direction, a path, she whispered. "A safe path." Rook leaned closer, his fingertip grazing the same curve. Then he pressed his palm flat against the symbol. Dana felt her heartbeat echo in her hands. "I think someone gave this to you," she said slowly. "So you'd find me. Or maybe, so I'd find you." The door creaked just slightly, like the wind had something to say. That evening, Hank showed up soaked and out of breath. Mud splattered up to his knees. He'd taken the long trail from the southern ridge, eyes sharp, mouth tight. "I saw Roy," he said, closing the door behind him. "He's been watching your cabin from the far tree line. Said he saw a shadow." Dana stiffened. "I think he's planning to bring the sheriff." She looked over at Rook, who stood in the corner now, eyes low. Hank took off his wet jacket, hung it by the stove. His tone changed. "Dana, I've known you since before the fire tower days. I know your heart. And I know something's living here that's more than what most people understand. He stepped closer. If you need me to lie, I will. If you need me to stand between you and a man with a badge, I'll do it. Just say the word. She hadn't realized her hands were shaking. Hank reached out, gently covered them with his own. You're not alone in this. Later that night, after Hank left with a quiet nod and a promise to keep watch, Dana stepped onto the porch, the rain now misting like breath on glass. She looked toward the trees and whispered into the dark. Was it you? No wind answered, but the woods stirred, and deep within them, a single low tone vibrated through the branches, a sound like the inside of a drum. Not loud, but resonant. Her skin prickled. She stepped back inside and shut the door with care. Hours passed. The fire dimmed. She dozed off in the chair, a blanket over her legs, and woke to movement. Outside the window, 3 shapes stood just beyond the clearing. The rain had stopped. The clouds had lifted enough to let a sliver of moonlight through. She stood slowly. The tallest figure stood still, one hand at its side. Broad shoulders, fur damp and gleaming. Next to it, slightly smaller, younger, stood Rook. No longer inside. He was out there, between them, the third figure. She recognized before her heart could catch up. Willow. She stepped forward, the moonlight touching her face, and Dana knew this was not a visit. This was a reckoning. She opened the door and stepped out barefoot, the wet porch planks cold beneath her soles. She moved slowly, careful not to startle. Willow watched her with eyes ancient and knowing. She raised her hand, not in warning, not in welcome, but in acknowledgement. Dana nodded, and from deep in the trees, another sound rippled through the earth, the kind that isn't heard with ears but with blood. Rook turned back to Dana, his expression unreadable. He wasn't afraid. He was choosing. Not leaving, not yet, but choosing to stand where 2 worlds met. Dana placed a hand over her chest, then extended it toward him, a gesture of offering, and across the space, Willow did the same. 3 hearts, 1 thread, and between them, the silence held, thick with the weight of understanding. The past was no longer locked, and the future had just turned its face toward them. Spring arrived with hesitation that year, the kind that tiptoed in, unsure whether the earth was ready to be warm again. Patches of snow still lingered in the shadows, and the creek behind Dana's cabin ran cold and restless, filled with meltwater and old stories. The trees had begun to wake, but slowly. Buds trembled at their fingertips, as if they too were holding their breath. Inside the cabin, things were quieter than before. Not in sound, but in spirit. Rook had grown taller still, not just in height, but in the way he moved, the way he looked at the world. He didn't curl beneath blankets anymore. He didn't flinch when the wind changed. He stood longer at the window, now not with fear, but with knowing. He spent more time outside now. Not far, just beyond the porch, sometimes beneath the old ash tree, sometimes crouched by the stream, his fingers trailing the current like it spoke in a language he was trying to remember. Dana watched him from the steps most mornings, a mug of coffee cradled in her hands and something heavy lodged behind her ribs. He wasn't hers. Not really. Not anymore. He still looked at her with the same eyes, but the boy who had once tucked himself beneath her table, who had cried beneath her roof, who had reached for her hand in the dark, he had turned into someone who could survive without her. And that was the ache of real love. One evening, as the sky bruised toward dusk, she found him sitting in the garden bed she'd abandoned last fall. He was quiet, back turned, shoulders slightly hunched. When she approached, he didn't startle. He simply pointed. A single daffodil had broken through the soil, pale yellow, fragile as breath. She crouched beside him. That wasn't there yesterday, she murmured. Rook touched the petals like they were skin, and then, softly, he whispered a sound she hadn't heard before. A single note, low, barely formed, like the beginning of a name. Her throat closed. Something was changing, and it wasn't waiting for her permission. She didn't sleep much that night. The wind carried too many questions. By morning, Jesse showed up on the ridge, his boots caked in red clay. He looked older too, eyes harder, jaw tighter. "Dad's getting ready," he said. "He's got 3 others, bringing gear, traps, not just a rifle this time." Dinah didn't need to ask. "Tomorrow," Jesse added. "They're heading up the bluff trail at sunrise." She closed her eyes, her breath catching like thread in a needle. She thought about running, thought about throwing what little she owned into the back of Hank's truck and driving until the woods behind her no longer looked familiar. But that would be a cage too, for both of them. So when night fell, she sat with Hank by the fire and said the thing she'd been holding in her chest for too long. "I need to take him home." Hank didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "I'll go with you," he said. Jesse didn't hesitate either. You shouldn't have to do it alone. So they packed at first light, nothing more than they could carry in 2 packs. Blankets, water, an old compass that had belonged to Dana's father, and the small bundle of cedar bark Rook had kept since the beginning. Rook didn't speak, but when she handed him the pack, he shouldered it with quiet resolve. He touched her elbow once, gently, like thank you. Then he led. Through the hollow, past the stream, up the slope where the pines grew thick. Their boots made little sound on the moss. The air was damp with morning light, and somewhere nearby, a hawk cried overhead. Rook moved like he'd always known the way, his posture straight, his pace steady. Dinah's knees ached. Hank moved slower than he used to, but they kept going. Halfway up the ridge, they paused for water beneath a bluff covered in lichen. The trees whispered above them, their shadows stretched long and thin. That's when Jesse saw movement through the trees. 3 figures, Roy in front, shotgun over his shoulder, the others behind him, scanning the woods. "They're coming up from the south path," Jesse said, teeth clenched. "We don't have much time." They moved fast now, cutting northeast toward the old stone outcrop Dana remembered from her childhood hikes. The air grew thinner, and Rook's steps quickened, like the ground itself was pulling him forward. Then, as they crested the final hill, the sound behind them changed. Crack! A branch, heavy boot. Dana turned. Roy was there, shotgun raised 30 yards away. "Stop right there," he barked. Rook stepped in front of Dana, arms spread slightly. The clearing fell into silence. "Whatever that thing is," Roy growled, "it's leading you somewhere you don't understand." "You're right," Dana said, her voice sharp. "I don't understand all of it." She stepped beside Rook now. "But I understand enough." Roy didn't lower the gun. And then the trees behind them parted. A shadow emerged, taller than any of them, broader, every inch of it humming with power. "Cairn." He stepped forward slowly, the earth seeming to bend beneath him. His gaze locked onto Roy's, his breath visible in the cold air. Roy froze. The rifle trembled. Cairn said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to draw every ounce of heat from the air. Dana watched as Roy took a step back, then another. Behind her, Rook stood perfectly still, staring at the figure who had once been only a shape in the dark. Cairn reached out a hand, not to Roy, to Rook. Donna felt it then, like the forest itself was shifting weight. The moment had arrived, and there was no running from it. No soft way through. Willow appeared next, slipping through the brush like a wind made visible. Her eyes met Dana's across the clearing. Dana nodded and stepped back. She touched Rook's arm. "You're ready," she whispered. Rook looked at her one last time. He touched her shoulder, then turned toward his kind. Willow raised her head and let out a sound that vibrated through every rib in Dana's chest. A call, not a command, a welcome. The trees responded. Birds lifted. The moss quivered. And from behind the rocks, other shapes began to emerge. Bigger, smaller, older, younger. Rook stepped forward. The forest swallowed him whole. And still, Dana didn't cry. Not yet, because even as her feet remained in the human world, her heart had begun the slow, painful walk of letting go. And somewhere behind them, Roy lowered his gun, not because he understood, but because he'd finally seen what it looked like when someone chose to go home. The sun had begun its descent, casting the Ozarks in a copper-gold haze that made every pine needle glow, every tree trunk stretch its shadow across the earth like a memory. The sky held that impossible spring stillness, where everything seemed to pause for just a beat longer than necessary, as if nature itself was holding back from turning the page. Dana stood on the ridge in silence, the wind tugging gently at her sleeves, and she could feel it. This was the moment, not the end of a story, but the quiet release of one. Across from her, Roy stood still, boots planted, shoulders hunched forward, his fingers loose around the stock of his rifle. He wasn't aiming anymore. He wasn't shouting. He was just looking at them, at the way Willow positioned herself between Dana and the trees, at the way Cairn's massive body stood just behind, not threatening, just undeniably there, and at Rook, who stood in the middle of them all, shoulders upright, breathing steady, not flinching beneath Roy's gaze. There was a flicker of something in Roy's face. Not fear, not anger, but memory, a long-buried one. It showed in the way his jaw clenched, how his mouth opened like it wanted to say something, but closed again. Dana took a step forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain anything. She didn't need to, because right then, Roy lowered the rifle. Not because he was outnumbered, not because he was afraid, because he saw a boy standing tall, flanked by guardians who didn't need words to speak, and a woman who looked at that boy the way you'd look at someone you'd once given everything to. He saw it all. And then he saw his own son, Jesse, standing just behind Dana, his face caught somewhere between awe and ache. Roy's arms dropped to his sides. His voice, when it came, was low. Gravel scraped. Human. "I almost pulled a trigger once," he said, looking past everyone to the trees. "Didn't know my own boy was walking out of the thicket. Thought it was a deer." He looked at Jesse. "He was 10. Then he looked at Rook. And this time, his eyes softened. Just enough. "I won't make that mistake twice." Dana felt something unwind in her chest, like a rope slowly loosening from around her heart. She turned to Rook. He looked back at her, and this time, there was no fear, no hesitation, just presence, and something more. She walked toward him slowly, one step at a time. When she reached him, she crouched. The earth was soft from the week's rain, and the moss welcomed her knees like an old friend. Rook met her there, sinking down with her. She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "You never did." His fingers closed around hers, and she smiled through the pressure in her chest. Willow approached from behind and knelt, eyes level with Dinah's. The Bigfoot mother extended one hand, pressed her palm gently to her own chest, then reached out and pressed it to Dinah's. A wordless vow. "You are a mother too." Dana couldn't speak, but she nodded. Once. And that was enough. Cairn moved then, stepping forward with surprising softness for something that large. In his hands, he held a small piece of dark wood, smoothed by years, carved with curved symbols and a spiral etched deep into the grain. He held it toward Hank, who had remained still near the edge of the clearing, hat in his hand, lips parted in quiet disbelief. The Bigfoot's eyes met his, and Hank stepped forward and took the gift. His fingers closed around the wood like it was sacred. Cairn touched his chest once, then gestured to the hills. Dana knew what it meant. This land would remember, and it would protect those who had protected. Rook turned now. He walked to the edge of the trees where shadows fell longer and deeper, where light pooled into blue and everything started to feel like story instead of fact. He paused there, didn't look back. Not yet. Dana didn't call after him. She let the silence sit. She let it breathe. And just as his feet met the moss beyond the last shaft of sunlight, he stopped. He turned. His eyes found hers again. And he raised one hand, awkward, slow, but sure. A wave, a goodbye, a thank you. Then he disappeared into the trees. And this time, he didn't come back. Weeks passed, then months. The cabin felt different now. Not empty, not quiet. Just full of something that no longer needed to be explained. Dana took up the garden again. Turned the soil, planted new seeds. She made stew and left a bowl outside some nights, just because. She and Hank hiked together on Sundays. Jesse brought firewood more often than needed. The town stopped asking questions. People talk less when peace settles in. And the forest, it spoke differently now. Not loud, but deeper. And every so often, on the stillest nights, when the lantern burned low and the air outside was too soft to be spring and too warm to be winter, Dana would hear it. That low, distant call, like a name remembered. Not mournful, not lost. Just part of her now. She'd lean against the doorway, sip her tea, and close her eyes. Not to forget, but to feel it all again, because love doesn't always mean keeping. Sometimes it means letting go, so that the love has space to walk forward, to grow into its real shape. And the forest always gives back what you place in it. Maybe not in the way you expect, maybe not in your time, but it always returns. And what it brings back is up to you. Sometimes, life places something unexpected in our path, not to test us, but to awaken the parts of us we've buried under grief, fear, or time. And sometimes that something doesn't look like us, speak like us, or even belong in the same world we thought we understood. But it reaches for us anyway, quietly, without asking anything in return. There are moments in life that don't arrive with fanfare or clarity, only with the soft ache of recognition. You don't always know why something matters until it's gone, or why a connection feels sacred until you're asked to let it go. That's the way the most important truths work. They don't crash into your world. They drift in. They sit beside you without speaking. And then, one day, you realize they changed everything. Compassion isn't always loud. It's not always heroic. Sometimes it's simply staying, choosing not to walk away. Sometimes it's setting a place at the table for something you don't yet understand. Sometimes it's keeping the door unlocked, not for what might come in, but for what might need to leave when the time is right. And love, true love, is not measured by how tightly we hold on, but by how bravely we let go. There is no weakness in kindness. There is no foolishness in trust. The world will try to convince you that safety lies in suspicion, in hardening your heart, in guarding what's yours. But the truth is, what is meant to find you will, and what is meant to return will only do so if it's free to leave. Sometimes the greatest act of strength is choosing not to fear the unknown, but to meet it, to shelter it, and when the moment calls for it, to release it with grace. Because this world is not divided by species, borders, or language, not in the ways that truly matter. It is divided by those who remember how to care, and those who've forgotten. Let us be the ones who remember. Thank you truly for being part of this journey. If this story touched something in you, if it made you feel, remember, or wonder, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in stories that speak to the heart, that explore the quiet spaces where humanity and mystery meet, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our growing community. There are still many stories in these woods, and you're always welcome here.